Welcome to the final interview in the Beyond Cloud series presented by Intelligent HQ and hosted here in London at Group INSEEK. Today I've got the pleasure of having the tables turned on me by David Terror, who's going to pose the same 4 questions that I've been posing across the industry for the past several months.
Hello, my name is David Terror. It's very good to be here sitting in this chair for a change. I actually started off this sequence of interviews being interviewed by Daniel as the cloud consultant, and today I'm turning the tables on him and interviewing him as the cloud watcher. And over the courses of the interviews, he's actually spoken to a number of different people, service providers, lawyers, different people giving a perspective on the cloud topic and where it's going next. And it will be good to hear his views for a change and to see what he's learned from the different people he's spoken to. My company, I work for a company called D2C, so I'm a cloud consultant and a cloud service provider, and I'm involved in some of the cloud industry groups. So I have a particular perspective. So, Daniel, first off, you're here this time as the cloud watcher rather than the interviewer. Can you tell us a bit about your company, what you do, the way things have changed over the last few years, and the way you see things developing, please?
Thanks. Pleasure to have you here, and interesting to be on the other side of the table, I have to say. And I hope that my perspectives and views have been added to and changed and educated from the interviews that we've had. My background is IT for 30 plus years. If you scratch deep enough, you go to an assembler programmer and a network protocols guy. But over the last 15 years, I've kind of focused an awful lot more on the value of the technology to the business. And these days, I tend to work more with technology providers and some of their end users to help them to ensure they're doing the right stuff the right way. I'm a big proponent of planning, having seen so many IT projects go wrong, and the real analysis that I've seen from pretty much every one of them is a lack of planning or a lack of communication, which makes the good planning, if it's not spread out, then execution tends to fail. I believe that applies to everything that we're doing in the cloud today and everything that we've done in IT in the past, and pretty much any major project. My own background is primarily consulting. I've worked for companies like Accenture in Canada and America, and Capita over here, working at applying technology to actually derive value for a business and help them to save money and to do things better, stronger, and faster. Whereas a lot of what I think we've both seen over the years is companies doing things for the sake of doing it. And this is one of the concerns I've been talking about in the cloud interviews about cloud's a great place. It's just a matter of putting the right stuff in that place and the right timing. It's not, everybody shouldn't be jumping in, which is what I've been seeing a fair bit of.
No, I agree with you, and really what you're really saying is that it's more to do with the business value that you're going to get out of a solution than the technology that underlies it.
Well, when this stuff was invented, for lack of another word, the entire purpose was if we spend this much money, it should generate that much value. That this was meant to be an investment, and I've seen most IT over the years deliver value to the business, but at an expense and at a cost and at not getting what you want. And to me, a machine, like a lever, is something that you use it to make something happen easier. And if it actually makes it more difficult, or your bottom line is going up because of what you're doing, but going down because of the doing of it, then you're not actually really creating the value. So you need to take an awful lot more close look up front and determine what your requirements are, get it down straight from all of the different views, a lot of the times I end up filling the role of a translator, because you have the business, the security, the technology, and the other aspects of the business that they don't necessarily communicate. Whether that's the company that's selling, you have a salesman and you have an operations team and you have a solutions team, and they don't nearly communicate as enough as they should, or when it's the end user departments and the companies that are saying what they need, I find that is probably the most critical step, and probably, like your opinion, the one that's not paid nearly enough attention to.
Well, let's move on to the next question, which is, okay, we're at a particularly special place in terms of the evolution of technology. This big thing, Is it any different from the last big thing? Is it just another cycle in the way technology develops? What do you think?
There's a yes and a no to that. It's the same as every other last big thing in terms of hype and expectations and lack of looking at what it can do and planning and getting it done properly. But it's slightly different because we have a evolution of the technology that we've had over the years, and this combination of, it's not just cloud, it's what enabled cloud, right? The cloud wouldn't work if you didn't have lots of networks everywhere, and lots of access everywhere.
Yep.
The real benefits of clouds wouldn't necessarily be, cloud computing wouldn't necessarily be derived unless you have mobile access and you can start doing things from different places, because that's actually meant to be one of the real benefits. So if you're applying cloud into a space and you don't change the practices of the business, you don't change the approach, if you still believe that people all need to converge into one spot for a meeting rather than using teleconferencing and other forms of remote working, chances are your business isn't orientated mentally to actually get the real value that they could out of things. I'm a long-term proponent that if you have an automated system or if you have a manual system and you go to a new version of it, if you do what was done instead of fixing it and making it better or modeling it to work better with the technology that will enable it and changing your processes so that you can leverage the savings or the time savings or the other efficiencies. If you don't do those things and you simply apply that technology to the same problem, personally, I don't think that you're really getting the type of value that you could get. Some cases, that's what you need to do, but it's like, if we go back to the big SAP starts in I guess it was the 90s, right? Yeah. The thing about SAP is fantastic, big all-in-one system that if you make your business work the way that SAP works, you can save an awful lot of money. If, however, every step of the way you make SAP adjust to your business, you are in a never-ending cycle of changing the systems to match your processes. And it's a constant expense, and you're not going to get the value that you're going to perceive as a bottom line because you spent too much money to derive what you're looking for. Cloud is meant to change all of that. Cloud is meant to allow you to invest without spending money, so you're investing time and the business into capabilities that you would have had to outlay a lot of capital expense for as well. You're starting to open up possibilities of getting to different markets, and that's because everybody else is using the cloud. So you now have a central point from which people can start to communicate. I think cloud is kind of a lost term because it's like security. We're having discussions that cover far too many things. Yep. If I'm having a discussion with a business about moving their financial systems into the cloud, and we're talking about Dropbox and Google Apps in the same conversation, or if we're talking about security and we're talking about firewalls, antivirus, and CCTV in the same sentences, then we're using one term to cover too many things. So I think we need to get away from cloud computing other than as a title line and start digging into the table of contents.
What's your thoughts on some of the other big shifts that people are talking about in terms of you mentioned mobile, but things like social and the consumerization of IT or big data? Are they just things that the cloud technology is enabling and making happen, or do they come into play as well?
I think they're enabling cloud technology. Yeah. And if I've used the term before, and I've heard it too many times as well, but it's this perfect storm of all of these things at once. So the attitudes and behaviors that social media has built into people, the people giving away their data to Google and Facebook while they make billions, the same people arguing about the government looking at the same data for non-profit purposes and protection purposes, all of these things combined, the attitudes of the consumer world where the technology is in their hands and the ability of a business to start supporting bring your own device and to start realizing the value in it rather than feeling it a penalty to the business like it used to be. So yeah, I think all of these things, and the computing power and connectivity, they're all contributing, because this big data thing, you wouldn't be able to get at it or look at it or figure out what's there if you didn't have this type of capability. And you wouldn't be gathering this much data. Granted, not all of it's good, but I see it working that way. So everything is integrated, and to say cloud has done this or mobile has done that, no, it's just our computing industry, and these are just different splinters of it that are significantly different, better, stronger, faster than they used to be.
Earlier this week I was involved in a webinar about cloud standards, and one of the slides that one of my colleagues put up had 35 different standards organisations who are doing something to do with cloud. What do you think about that regulation topic? Do you think the cloud needs regulating, or should we just let the market decide?
I guess the first thing I have to state is concern and fear. 35 standards organizations to me sounds like an administrative nightmare and a bunch of people competing and arguing to have their standard recognized rather than somebody else's.
And sadly, the 35 is only a subset. There's probably actually about 90 different organizations doing something on cloud standards.
This stuff is necessary. A lot of companies spend a lot of their time and many of their resources to have people on these committees, which to me expresses a realization that there's a commercial value to those companies, which means that's not what these standards are really meant to be and for. The idea of standards defining things so that there is a clear common understanding about what something means is pretty good. Like if we take an ISO 27001, I'm not necessarily a big ISO fan, but we know what it is and we have a certification and we can clearly understand that a particular set of criteria that are critical for things like compliance and regulations and the like are covered. So that type of standard is very necessary.
And things like Wi-Fi or electricity sockets, that kind of thing.
Oh,
you know, standards are good in the right
Well,
way.
USB is one of the only commonalities between Apple and PCs, right? And thank God that we at least have that type of cleverness, right? Because then I can plug either of them into my car or into my device at home. Exactly. So standards, yeah, I get that. There's a big difference between a soft standard and a hard standard, though, right? If I've got a hardware standard for Wi-Fi, then there are protocols. I mean, I can get down to the nth level. You have to do it this way or it won't work. Yeah. When you're talking about other standards, they're an awful lot more fluffy. They're an awful lot more subject to interpretation, which is why these companies get involved. And again, we need this because we need to have kind of guideposts and guidelines for the industry. But I think people focusing and spending too much time on it is probably not what the businesses that are trying to get value out of cloud really need from it. Regulation is a different issue, though. I don't see any reason why the government is getting involved in how we deliver things. I don't believe that beyond having standards and compliance bodies that are supported and funded by governments that there's any real value in that, because what needs to be managed by the government is what's in the cloud. It's the data. It's what people are doing with it and how we're controlled and protected. But the actual cloud itself, this is how we do business. I don't believe that there's any real necessity, unless you're starting to break laws and things like this, that there's no real necessity for government involvement. There hasn't been in the past at the way that they're talking about with the cloud. So I think that we're looking at a popularity contest and we're looking at an opportunity for sound bites from politicians because they want to get involved with the cloud stuff the same way as the government got involved in the tech city sector. Mm-hmm. There's lots of value peripheral to their own value, but I personally believe they're looking at their own value as well. What do you think about regulations? I remember from the chat at the beginning that you were more in favor of it. Have you expressed any changes in that space?
I don't think my view has changed. My main concern is that there are so many organisations involved and so many different, potentially competing standards, creating too much noise. And actually, the ITU and ISO are putting together some common language and a glossary of terms that we can at least all, as an industry, coalesce around. And that kind of initiative is good. It's just a matter of focusing on clarity and value and things that are going to be of help to end customers. Let's not lose sight of that's what this is all about.
Well, that's what they're meant to be protecting, aren't they? These standards are meant to allow users to know what they're getting. So when you buy that USB device that says USB 2.0, it works in every other USB 2.0 spot.
Exactly. So my concern more is the fact that we're at a kind of a painful stage because the cloud industry isn't as mature as it ought to be yet, and so we've got to cut through that noise and get somewhere quicker.
See, that's where I'm going to argue with you, because I don't think the term cloud industry helps us, because we're not a cloud industry, right? We are the IT sector that covers across all industries, right? So we're kind of, in many ways, we're very, very long, very broad and not so deep, and then other focuses, it's very specific. But I think cloud is really just computing. And in fact, we were doing cloud computing way before we ever coined the term cloud. And it seems to me that if we focus too much on cloud, what we're actually going to do is going to recreate this exact same mess and confusion and hype that we're in when somebody comes up with a new term for the next thing. So I'd rather just focus this onto the types of computing that we're trying to deliver, the outcomes that we're getting, right? And standards have reasons to be applied to help the people that are doing it and help the people that are buying it, and the control that's required. But I don't know, if you talked about computing as a general term in the late 80s, would that have been mainframes? Would it have been client-server in the Sun model? Would it have been client-server in the DEC model? Like, there's so many different strands, and it's continuing that way. So I think we're actually doing ourselves a disservice by lumping it all into one category.
I get where you're coming from, but and there is an argument to say it's all technology. We're just talking about the latest flavour, the latest fashion of the way it's delivered. And that comes on to your fourth question about if you take your premise that this cloud topic is really just another delivery model. So where are we heading? What happens next? Do we stop using the cloud term within 5 or 10 years? Are we going to move on to the next thing? What's your view?
I think it's a tough question, actually. Now that I think about it, it must have been difficult for all the people I've been asking as well. The way I look at cloud computing, social media, big data is the first word is not necessary, right? We're talking computing, we're talking data, we're talking mobile, we're talking media, and we're talking about the different things that are enabling people to access information or tools to allow them to do their job or to make a profit or to sell something or to help somebody else. So I believe all media needs to be social media. I believe all computing is ultimately going to be a version of either public or private, or in some cases a hybrid answer. And I think the hybrid answer is probably the one that we're going to see more of as people evolve and they move into it. My problem with cloud, as I mentioned earlier, is people creating something, taking something that's existing in an IT space and working and moving it to the cloud. I'd like to know why they're moving it. Is there a compelling business reason for that? Have they taken all of the value out of what they could have gotten from their original investment? Because all of this stuff is meant to be an investment. You're not supposed to be expensing your IT. You're meant to use it to deliver additional value or bring different revenues into the company. And that's for organizations that rely on technology as their business, organizations that use technology to deliver their business, and then organizations who just have technology as pipes and plumbing and electricity like they need to, because pretty much every business has some sort of a connectivity. As far as the next big thing goes, or where this is all going to take us, I think it's just really starting to get the value out of the stuff that we've been doing for the last 25 years, 30 years. The data that's been accumulated, there's vast amounts of knowledge out there. People have to start to sort the wheat from the chaff. And I think going forward, when we talk about the amount of stuff we're accumulating and the volume and scale that it's happening at, I think we need to start getting rid of some data. I think we need to start creating a slag heap of the stuff that we just throw away, because there's far too much of it and it gets way too expensive to search, to find, to actually discover the value that you're looking for. 99% of the tweets that I see are interesting but throwaway. There's a small, well, maybe not 99, but there's a small percentage where there's some real value, and those are the ones that I want to keep, the ones that I maybe make a favorite of, or I save the item, because they're knowledge that I need to collect is not news anymore, because anything that's new today, things move way too fast. So new today doesn't mean it's old tomorrow.
I get what you're saying in part, but I actually also think that this is part of the reason that this time now is different, because we're collating all of this data, because we have the capacity to do it, because of the economics having changed dramatically from 5 and 10 and 20 years ago. That leads us to the big data thing. It leads us to a way of analysing things like tweets, things like trends, in a way that we couldn't possibly have afforded to do before. So I think for me, this is part of where we're heading. Although I'm somewhat concerned over the big data topic. I'm interested in your views. I have a feeling that big data is another term that's dramatically misused in the way that cloud computing was a few years ago, and people are slapping big data on all sorts of things which are actually just straight normal analytics. What's your view on that?
Big is a matter of the eyes of the beholder, right? Like big data for a small company is significantly different than big data for, say, an international insurance company. I think the real key is to actually discover the value that's in there. And now, yeah, we do have that processing power. I've heard people talk about oil wells and say, well, if you can inject stuff into the oil well like carbon dioxide to bring oil out of the bottom, then you know you've got value there and you just have to go get it. So if we think about big data as a ship on a river, it used to be that we knew where the ship was and we knew where the river was and where it started and it ended, and that was pretty simple. Now we believe there's a ship on the ocean and we have to find it first, and then we have to see what's on the ship. So we don't really know what's out there. There's a lot of value, but I think there's a lot of money being spent, and there will continue to be a lot of money being spent while people try to discover and understand exactly what the value is to their business. The bigger companies can really afford to do that and probably have an awful lot more value to derive from the data. I think a lot of companies are going to start to take a look at how they accumulate data, and getting data analysts on board is great if you can find them, but it'd be really nice if you told them what they're trying to find. Right? Because unless somebody understands your business, your market, your sector intimately, they need your guidance to understand what they're interpreting. So, yeah, big data is a bit of a scary term because it's really smart data that you're looking for. It's data that has value and intelligence, and it's literally a big pile of stuff, and you don't know what's in there. And you don't always have the context to be able to understand what it is as well. So you have to also decide, is it worth that investment? Like, what is the potential outcome of it? And what's my plan? What am I going to do when I get the stuff? And how am I going to act on it? Because having big data, discovering big data, accumulating the stuff that you want into the smart data space, if you don't know what you're going to do with it next, it's like having a pilot project when you don't know when you're finished what comes afterwards. So I think there's going to be a lot of time and money spent poorly, but I think that's just the nature of this type of evolution. Some clever people will start to figure out some things a little bit more quickly, but I don't think the answer is just Hadoop and raw power and analysis. You need to actually know what you're looking for, know what problem you're trying to solve.
You quite rightly keep bringing it back to the business value and the problem we're trying to solve, which is absolutely right. My last additional question is that you've asked that question about the future of lots of people over the last few weeks and during this series. Seen now that you've listened to all those different answers, are you more optimistic about the future or less optimistic?
I don't know if I'm ever optimistic or pessimistic. I just tend to be realistic, or maybe opportunistic at times. I think the lesson that I've learned from the dozen or so discussions that we've been having in this space is that everybody is too busy looking at what's going on today to really worry too much about tomorrow. And I think that's how our industry has always been. It's one of these live action, real-time type of spaces. Nobody had a really good answer for where we're going next or what we're getting beyond what we've just been talking about, getting value from this stuff, right? So what I think the big, if there were a panacea, it would be we're going to start to get some serious value from all of these things that we've been doing over these years. But no matter how good the technology is or how much value there is in the data, if we keep doing it wrong, if we don't plan it right, if we don't schedule it right, if we don't communicate it, if we don't monitor it and manage it, we're going to end up not getting value just like we have in the past. And I personally think IT could contribute an awful lot more than it does if businesses stopped worrying about politics and control and just actually worried about pulling together. And I know for a fact that both of us in our jobs tend to translate people who are arguing about the same thing and pulling in the same direction without realizing that they are. And sometimes it's as simple as that. And if I can see that happening in my client base, which includes small and very large customers, then I can't imagine it's not pretty much the same across the field. And it's really a matter of people, this may sound rude, stop worrying about being right and just worry about getting the right answer. And it doesn't matter where it comes from because we're a team. And the result that we get is the success at the end. As long as you have people that are worried more about the individual than we're going to, than the organization, we're going to have an issue. Now that's a bit of a contradiction to a blog I wrote last week where I said we're in an IT renaissance, and what enabled the renaissance was the sharing of knowledge and the communication and learning from the past, and the fact that in the renaissance there was now a focus on the individual rather than the organization, the state, or the church. That is still the case in terms of everything that we can get and everything that we can do and how it gets accomplished, but you need to be kind of focused on the same targets, because if your success and my success are on that thing and we both don't have that same thing in mind, then we're not likely to succeed.
Thank you very much for that, Daniel. It's actually been really interesting to be involved in this Beyond Cloud series, to be there at the start and kind of kick things off, and now to turn the tables on you and interview at the end. So it's certainly been very satisfying for me, and I hope people get a lot of value out of this sequence.
I hope so as well, and I really appreciate your assistance. It's been quite an interesting ride.
Excellent.